James Carter had lived in the same small town his entire life. He worked as a librarian, spending his days surrounded by dusty books and forgotten stories. He liked the quiet and the predictable rhythm of his life, until the day he found the letter. It was hidden inside an old book, tucked between the yellowed pages of a novel no one had borrowed in decades. The envelope was brittle, the ink faded, but he could still make out the name on the front: Eleanor Whitmore. The address was unfamiliar, but the date caught his eye: March 12, 1928. Curiosity got the better of him. He carefully unfolded the letter and began to read. It was a love letter, filled with words of longing and devotion. The writer, a man named Henry, promised to wait for Eleanor at the old train station at midnight. He spoke of running away together, of escaping a life that had kept them apart. James felt a pang of sadness. Had Eleanor ever received this letter? Had she made it to the station? There was only one way to find out. That night, James searched the town's archives. He found an old newspaper article from 1928, "Local Woman Disappears Without a Trace." The article mentioned Eleanor Whitmore, a young woman last seen near the train station. No clues were ever found, and the case remained unsolved. James couldn't let it go. He visited the abandoned train station, now a forgotten ruin. As he stood on the crumbling platform, he felt a strange sensation, as if someone was watching him. The air grew heavy, and he heard a faint whisper, "Henry?" He turned sharply, but there was no one there, only the wind, carrying a voice from the past. His heart pounded. Was Eleanor still waiting for an answer that never came? The next day, James returned to the library and placed the letter back in the book. Some stories, he realized, were meant to stay unfinished. But as he shelved the novel, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, somehow, Eleanor was still waiting. Days passed, but James couldn't stop thinking about the letter. He decided to investigate further. He tracked down an elderly woman named Margaret, a retired historian who had spent years researching the town's unsolved mysteries. When he mentioned Eleanor's name, Margaret's eyes widened. "Eleanor Whitmore? I remember my grandmother talking about her. She was engaged to a wealthy businessman, but people said she was in love with someone else, a man her family didn't approve of. Some say she planned to run away, but she never made it." James shared what he had found. Margaret led him to an old house on the outskirts of town, abandoned and overgrown with ivy. "This was Eleanor's home," she whispered. "Some say her ghost still lingers here, waiting for Henry." Determined to uncover the truth, James ventured inside. Dust coated the floor, and the air smelled of decay. He found a small study filled with papers and photographs. On the desk, he discovered another letter, this one never sent. It was from Eleanor, addressed to Henry. In it, she wrote of her fears, her love, and her desperate hope that he would wait for her. A noise echoed through the empty house. James turned, his pulse quickening. A shadow flickered in the dim light, and he felt an icy chill. "Henry," a voice whispered. James bolted from the house, clutching the letter. That night, he returned to the train station, standing where Henry had once waited. He read Eleanor's letter aloud, hoping to bring peace to the restless spirit. As he finished, the air grew still. A faint, sorrowful sigh drifted through the night. And then, silence. James never saw Eleanor's ghost again, but he knew, at last, her story had been told. And somewhere, perhaps in another world, she and Henry had finally found each other.